Than the experience perhaps of the former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. Well, let's get some more analysis, and now Peter is in studio with a guest. Peter.
Francis, thanks very much indeed. In fact, joining me is Lebogang Pheko, who's the Senior Research Fellow and Political Economist with Trade Collective. Thanks very much for joining us. So a lot of people, we actually went onto the streets and asked people what they thought and what they knew about junk status. And perhaps not surprisingly, younger people, not a lot of people actually quite know what that means. And yet, it affects all of us, doesn't it? So, in layman's terms, just kind of explain it to us and why we should be paying attention.
So the reason we should be paying attention is because it means that the rate of our ability to borrow money from investment bonds internationally is going to be much higher. This also means that because most of these loans are in dollars US and the rand has depreciated considerably even over the past few days, the rate of return and the rate of payment is going to be either longer, which means then that the state has to find other forms of funding from which to pay back those loans and to pay back the interest on those loans, just like any other investment.
And why do we need to borrow that money in the first place?
So it's for stuff like, well, this is the reason why the former Minister of Finance was doing this abruptly ended roadshow, was to build investor relations in order to then bring back infrastructural development, to contribute to the state fiscus, which has been tightly constrained. It has to be said, the Reserve Bank has been tightly constrained by international investors who insist that we have to have a small reserve, and sometimes that reserve is money that other things could be done with. So we lend money from the international markets, which we may not necessarily need, because if we were deploying current resources effectively and with a bit more liberty, fiscal liberty, we would probably be able to free up some money in the budget. But in theory, it's for infrastructural development. It's to also to maintain large-scale business and business operations such as nuclear power stations, to keep the grid, ESCOM, and things like that working effectively.
So Jabu Sithole is in Soweto right now. He's watching this and he's thinking, look, this is all highfalutin. How does this involve me? So what do we tell him? So eventually we have to tell
Sithole that the one thing is that it might mean that you get less on your rand, because then particular producers and manufacturers have to buy materials or import materials internationally. Because the rand has been severely impacted by this, things are going to cost them more, which means that the cost is going to be carried forward to who? To Bras Thole in Jabulani Soweto, to all of us. It could also mean that the fuel, things like fuel prices may then be inflated, because unfortunately our currency and our markets are dollarized. So anything that happens against the rand and the dollar is bound to also impact on commodities, including fuel.
Does this then translate a little bit further down the road into the economy, recession, unemployment, inflation?
It's inevitable. So what happens? Look, I have to put a rider, which is that I have a very poor brief for the ratings agencies. I think that they've been irresponsible and reckless pre-2008 and problematic in their own way. So I have to preface my remarks with that. And that I think that they're also engaging in some political mischief. That said, the unfortunate thing about this scenario and what they represent is our inability to come together and to really pull our policy sentiments into a cohesive line that would then be able to re-galvanize the economy. That is what is needed at this moment. That and the other background narratives around the horrible misappropriation of massive state-owned enterprises, PRASA being a notable example, the R1 billion deal, the stepdaughter, etc., ESCOM, I should say, and the kinds of amounts of money that have been moving in and out will make it very difficult then for investors going forward to feel confident in lending these massive amounts to this country if they are going to be misused or misappropriated. I mean, we can call it wasteful expenditure, we can call it dishonest expenditure, whatever we want to call it. It is very difficult. If I can't trust you with 100 rand, I'm not going to lend you 1,000.
So one of the things that we've seen perhaps in the last year and a bit is less activity in terms of labour unrest in South Africa. could this now become a challenge if COSATU, the new trade union SAFTU, come into the fray against this current president, and somehow he manages to stay?
I think the interesting thing that the president has managed to do very successfully, Peter, is to demobilize social forces. We should look at his cabinet and we should be very aware that he has none of these appointments are coincidental. I was listening to the remarks that were made by Fikile Mbalula, the new Minister of Police, well, old new, basically, and the language that he was using, fire for fire, nail for nail, etc., which speaks to the fact that it's going to be increasingly difficult for people, for ordinary citizens, for civil movements, for social activists to be able to dissent and to gather in a safe space. And it also spoke to the criminalizing of social protest in ways that are very problematic. It spoke to the rights of the police and of the state apparatus to shoot anybody from whom they feel or perceive they may be in danger. Now, we've seen that Marikana, we've seen in other insurrections, Andreas Tatani, that spectre still looms large, that police excess has been one of the terrible banes of our of the last few years, and the lack of accountability. And now to give that license means that it will be very difficult for movements to organize, such as COSATU. And you're right, I mean, it's been a long time since any of the trade unions closed down the city. It's been a long time.
So what do you think is going to happen in the coming days and weeks? These forces are mobilizing for the president and against the president. They're going to come to a head. What do we see at the end of that journey?
I wouldn't even want to predict it, because the ground is shifting day to day, moment to moment, Peter. It would be, difficult to predict, but I think there are multiple scenarios. The one scenario is that we eventually have a stalemate between particular social forces, social movements, the trade unions, other civil organizations, your Save South Africas, etc., your Section 27s, and your other traditional NGOs, who are then able to bring about some kind of a catalytic force. I think the one thing that would be useful if South Africans want to see a change is to get off Twitter, put on some techies, and do some old school marching. I think the second thing that could happen is that we might see a deal in which these social forces are then able to apply pressure in conjunction with sympathetic parliamentary members and sympathetic NEC members to begin to prepare the ground for a dignified exit for the president. But I think that the worst case scenario, which may not be so bad, is that we have to understand that we're not only about, this is not about only saving the ANC. It can't be. It has to be about really galvanizing and salvaging South African sentiment and South African citizenship. And I think unless and until we're able to pull that together, it's going to be difficult. It won't be easy, and it's going to be probably get a lot nastier until it before now.
But as you say, the ground is shifting almost like the earthquake.
Yes, symbolically.
Lebogang Pheko, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and we look forward to chatting you again in the near future.
Absolutely.
All right.